Alrighty, it looks like we're good to go. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Thanks everyone for joining. It's good to be back. I know our last session was with the product group, so I hope you all had an opportunity to join that. Definitely a lot of goodness in terms of what's in the roadmap. Hopefully y'all were able to join some of the sessions that came out of Microsoft Build, a lot of major updates. So I'm going to try my best to cover some of those in today's updates. I have a lot of links, so just keep in mind I will drop the links in the chat window after the session and make sure that I post those on the GitHub repo today because there's a lot to comb through. And so I'll go ahead and kick it off now. If this is your first time joining, thanks so much for being here. My name is Kendall Roden. I'm a technical specialist on the Cloud Native Global Black Belt team at Microsoft, so focusing a lot on cloud native architecture in general, especially leveraging containers and Kubernetes. I will call out, I am one of the co-hosts of the Azure podcast, and we did a really, really great episode with Christina Compi talking through some updates in the app service space. I think a lot of times when we talk about workloads, specifically on this call, it's focused around AKS, but there's a lot of really great updates, especially in the networking side of how app service is running and a lot of good Java updates. So if that's something that you're interested in, I highly recommend checking out that episode. It definitely got me really excited about ASE v3 or ACE v3, however you want to say it, app service environment. A lot of really cool changes there. So just wanted to highlight that. I'll pass it over to Dave to introduce himself as well, and then we'll get into the updates.
Yep, my name's Dave Strable. Can work on the same team as Kendall, focused around Kubernetes and the open source ecosystem. If you want to connect with me, I'm at Dave_Strable on Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah, and I see we have Lynn Earl as well. Just a quick shout out to him. He's also on our team, does a lot of good work. And yes, I will post the link to the ACE updates in the chat. So great question. And I also do have visibility into the chat window. So if you have questions throughout, feel free to come off mute or drop those in the chat window. So I'll make sure to drop all the links after I give the updates. So I think most of you are familiar at this point with why we've held the AKS office hours. The goal really is to provide a direct line of sight into some of what's coming down the pipeline in terms of AKS features, but also just to talk through technology in the ecosystem that enhance your AKS experience and any preview features or new releases that come out. We want to make sure that we can establish a conversation with them on an ongoing basis. So feel free to continue to forward the invite to anyone that you think it would be relevant for. We had a recent change in how we enable public access to storage accounts in Azure from a Microsoft tenant. So I do need to update the meeting invites. So TBD, I'll make sure I get that done before the next session so that we can have a new invite that's posted on the GitHub repo. So what to expect for today, basically some ecosystem and AKS updates. And then we're going to talk with Thorsten about AKS with Terraform, which was something that was a requested topic from all of you. So Thorsten, if you want to, I have a quick intro to give for you, but would love for you to also introduce yourself. So just wanted to call out, Thorsten's been joining the calls for a while now, really focuses on cloud native architecture, targeting Azure from what I understand, and has done some really cool things. I checked out his website and he's done a lot in the community. He's been an MVP for a while. His blog has been recognized as one of the top 50 Microsoft Azure blogs in 2020. And then he's co-founded local.net and SharePoint user groups back in the, I guess, 2009 to 2013 and organized ShareCamp. So lots of really cool stuff. But if you want to come off mute and kind of add anything here, that would be great.
No, thanks for the introduction. So yeah, basically we got a question on a call, I think, a couple of weeks ago to talk a little bit about Terraform in the context of Azure and especially AKS. And so, yeah, here we are.
Well, we appreciate it. And I think this is setting a really good precedence for what we're hoping that these AKS office hours will continue to evolve into, right? All of you having the opportunity to share cool work that you're doing and highlight that here. So I think we can all benefit from learning about these things. So we really appreciate you stepping up and being, I think, our first external presenter on the office hours. So going to dive in now to some AKS updates. There is a lot because of things coming out of build. So just want to do a quick rundown of these before we get into all of the Terraform goodness. So recent release actually should be completing the rollout today. of AKS. The most recent release with a couple of previews worth calling out. So one of them is, I think as of May 25th, Kubernetes in Azure supported the 121 release. So in a preview, we now have 121.1. Also, disabling local accounts within the cluster is in preview. So I'll drop the link in the chat window to dive a little bit more into that. And then also we're in the process of releasing and supporting Containerd for Windows Server containers. I believe right now you can enable that in any cluster that's 120 and above. And then as that feature GAs, that'll be the default, similar to how it worked for Linux containers and AKS, with that becoming the default, I believe, as of 120 or 121. So I'll make sure to drop the links in there for any clarification around versioning, but that's the main kind of things to call out here. If you weren't able to join the past couple of sessions, there have been a couple of other things worth calling out and just reviewing. So one of them is we now provide a supported add-on for the Secret Store CSI driver. So once again, this is really making it easy for you to integrate with Azure Key Vault and mount your secrets securely as a volume to your pods. So just keep in mind that is now something that is not only open source, but a supported add-on in AKS. It's currently in preview, so just keep that in mind if you want to play around with that and see how that maybe simplifies the overall experience without you having to manage the open source bits yourself. Recommend checking that out. Also released a preview for FIPS compliant nodes and the cluster auto upgrade process, where you can basically have your cluster auto upgrade. Will respect any maintenance window that you set in AKS. So if you said, hey, I only want the auto upgrade process to happen within a specific maintenance window, you can now configure that. So just keep that in mind. We also have a couple of GA announcements that I just wanted to call out pretty briefly. I know we've talked a lot around, or a lot of us are familiar with Azure RBAC and Kubernetes RBAC as well. And so as we continue to, I think, push down a lot of the features and functionality around our identity platform with Azure Active Directory, the AAD pod identity, or Azure Active Directory pod identity add-on, a lot of this with the goal of simplifying the authentication and authorization process for not only allowing users within your Active Directory tenant to authenticate to your cluster, but also to be able to further give granular access to those specific authenticated users. So with the release or GA of this RBAC for K8's authorization, essentially what's happening is we have 4 built-in Azure RBAC roles that allow you to assign intra-cluster permissions to your Azure Active Directory authenticated users. And so what this allows you to do is basically, if you have Azure RBAC set up where you're authenticated Azure Active Directory users within the cluster, you no longer have to set up the Kubernetes RBAC yourself. So traditionally, you would deploy your role binding or your cluster role binding, and you no longer have to do that if you use the K8's authorization route. If you have a user or service account that isn't in your Azure Active Directory tenant, then it will default to using Kubernetes RBAC and check and see if you have any of that configured intra-cluster. So really, I think this is nice because it streamlines that identity process from end to end. You don't have to do that custom setup within the cluster. And then really you can give full cluster access to the people who need it and granular access to those who don't, without having to kind of handle the handoff between what Azure handles versus what Kubernetes will handle. And so definitely check this out, play around with it. It's GA now. And then another GA announcement came on May 25th for basically encryption at host support in AKS. So if you're familiar with how this kind of works on traditional VMs, essentially the data that's stored on these AKS virtual machines or agent nodes will be encrypted at rest, so providing basically additional data security because you're getting that encryption from end to end. I believe from a temporary disk perspective, they're encrypted at rest with managed platform managed keys. But if you want to do like cache OS or data disk encryption, you can actually bring your own key as well. So keep that in mind. And then wanted to call out pretty briefly here some of the AKS build updates, because there were so many, especially if you heard about our kind of PaaS vNext or being able to run Azure App Services, things like Logic Apps, API management, functions, Event Grid, all on top of Kubernetes clusters running anywhere through Azure Arc as that single pane of glass. And so that was really the major update. And I think you'll continue to see a lot of us trying to abstract away Kubernetes more and more and provide developers with a framework and a platform that is super abstracted away so that you can continue to leverage the goodness of Azure PaaS while still getting the goodness of Kubernetes and potentially even running this in other cloud providers or on premises. So I think there's a lot of value and a lot of excitement around this update. If you didn't have a chance to check it out, I will drop, no less than like 5 or 6 links to some content that actually allows you to play around with this and also just get a better understanding of where we're headed in this space. And then there was a couple of other build updates that were worth calling out related to Kubernetes, one of which is running Kubernetes or AKS on Azure Stack HCI. And then another is Azure Arc, which we recently added as an add-on to AKS is now going to be integrated with Azure Arc. So you could push down that open service mesh control plane without having to do the deployment yourself onto a Kubernetes cluster managed by Azure Arc. So once again, that could be running in another cloud provider or on a Kubernetes cluster on premises or even running on your local machine through Azure Arc. So these were the major AKS or Kubernetes related build updates, but I would love to share a link so that you can check out some other updates in the other spaces where Microsoft is currently investing. One of the things we released out of build as well is the AKS baseline for regulated workloads. So if you're familiar, we've had the AKS production baseline for a while out there on GitHub. It doesn't really cover the CI/CD aspects, DevOps really, but what it does provide is a lot of scripts and best practices around how to set up your networking and infrastructure to take advantage of some of what we believe are security best practices when it comes to a production ready AKS cluster. And so now we've taken that a step further and essentially forked that repo with a focus on things like PCI, FIPS, CSI benchmarks. So if you are in a more regulated industry or just want a cluster that even takes security into more consideration than the traditional AKS baseline, all of this is out on GitHub and worth playing around with, right? I mean, anything that's a good place to start from and gives you a better direction to head is worth looking into. So I'll post the link to that in the chat window. And then just a couple more updates here from an AKS perspective. Some of our GBB Global Black Belt, if you're not familiar, counterparts in the cloud native space are hosting a European AKS Summit. I will post a link to that. It is June 15th and 16th of this, so that's 2 weeks from now, not even. And so if you want to register for that, it's completely free, and I think will just be a really good way to continue your learning journey or forward that on to anyone within your organization that might find that relevant. And then Niels, who works at Microsoft and does a lot of great work in the Kubernetes space, linked a free Kubernetes on Azure kind of 3rd edition ebook, and it's actually free. So I'm going to drop the link here if you're interested in checking out some additional information around what we recommend in terms of AKS. In terms of the is user assigned MSI for Kubelet now GA, I don't think the answer is yes. I can get confirmation on that, but Dave, Lynn, do either of you know if that GA'd? I do not think it did. Okay, I can check into that for you. But it might
your email address is your first name dot last name at gmail.com.
Right.
Okay.
You want me to spell it?
I'm not sure if this is pertinent to the call or if somebody just came off mute. Yeah, so I will look into that for you, but I think my current answer is no with a 90% confidence rate. So I'll check into that. One quick slide on ecosystem updates. So really cool. The Linux Foundation, in collaboration with the CNCF, basically has announced that you'll now have access to an exam simulator if you sign up for the Kubernetes application developer, security specialist, or administrator exams. So I know that that's been a point of conflict for some people. You don't really know what to expect in terms of the environment in which you'll be taking the exam. And so they've actually providing you with 2 demo attempts at the exam essentially, so that you can get practice and get comfortable with the exam environment. So that's just worth calling out if you do sign up. I think that'll help maybe ease some tension in terms of going into that exam without, a little bit more black box, right? So I thought this was a pretty cool announcement that just came out yesterday. Another is Cloud Native TV or cloudnative.tv is being managed by the CNCF and they essentially are going to be doing 10 weekly shows all within the cloud native space. So if you really like staying up to date, getting these updates that we do on these calls, or just talking through kind of 101 on some of these projects, they're going to be sharing all of that on an ongoing basis. So very similar to how Microsoft also has like a dev Twitch, where we do a lot of Microsoft-centric updates and Azure-centric 101s. I think this will be really cool if you're interested in checking that out. Another really interesting update, I'm sure that some of you have seen it circulating around LinkedIn, but essentially the team out of Linkerd recently went through and did some benchmarking on Istio via Linkerd and has found there's a lot of drastic difference in the performance of the two service meshes. Take that as you will, right? I would recommend checking it out and thinking through your own opinions on the subject. But I do think that this is important, right? That we continue to consider how some of these mesh technologies or even just sidecar technologies to support our application containers are affecting performance. I know Lynn and some of the others on my team are really looking into performance recently with a lot of these projects. And so I think that's just something to keep in mind, right? We have to think about the overhead we're adding on, especially if we're only using a subset of services. So would be interested to see how this continues to evolve and how we see more of these benchmarking and kind of performance-based tests coming out. And then last but not least, a couple updates where wanted to call out there's a GitOps Day hosted by Weaveworks happening June 9th and 10th. So I think that's next week, Wednesday and Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. There are a couple of Microsoft speakers, so just wanted to highlight that. Thanks, Alice, for the public preview call out of that. I thought that was the case, so appreciate you doing that. Alice is also on the team, so she'll probably pop in and out of these to continue supporting. And then the last one I had was Styra. So basically the startup that created the open policy agent, which we all know now as like a really great tool, especially as it's been integrated in with Azure Policy for AKS. But basically kind of that admission controller that is checking to make sure that our cluster meets the policy or compliance constraints that we've set. And so that startup is evolving in how it supports open policy agent. So they've been building tools to help you continue to use that policy agent across environments, not even just AKS with Gatekeeper, but just more generally as a governance and compliance or even policy engine. And so they're creating tools to help you leverage this OPA or open source tool in a more managed fashion. And so they recently got a lot of money to continue that investment. So I'm curious to see how that continues to evolve and how Styra becomes more and more relevant in this space. So that's all I have for you. I'm going to pass it over to Thorsten for the last 30, 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So if there's any questions around this, please let me know, but I'll make sure to post all of the links for you in the chat.
Cool. Can you give me the permission to present, actually? Kendall, can you give me the...
Yep, sorry,
permission?
I was speaking on you. I'm working on it. Sorry about that.
Good.
All right, at this point, you should have presentation, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So you should see my screen with the nice red slide right now. Yep, cool. Okay, so as already introduced, this is just a heads up on Terraform and how to deal with it probably in the context of Azure and especially AKS. So Kendall already did a great introduction about me. So the only thing you have to note right here is either my Twitter handle, so @TorstenHans, or my mail address. So if you have any question, don't hesitate to just reach out and ask. So we can skip over that one. So what we are going to see in the next, let's say 25 to 30 minutes, try to keep it short, is patterns and practice when using Terraform with Azure that we saw and identified through a ton of real world projects or customer driven projects that helped us to, enable the transition towards cloud native, because we see that infrastructure as code is like the first step on that journey towards going cloud native, right? So I will not do an introduction on Terraform or infrastructure as code at all, but there are plenty of resources available for free on the internet to ramp up your Terraform skills and adopt infrastructure as code in your environment. So basically, there are two parts of the talk. Just a quick overview what Terraform is. As I said, it's not an introduction, a 101 or on Terraform, and then we dive into a demo where I show some patterns and practices that I discovered and I think that are quite useful. So Terraform is an infrastructure as code tool set. The good thing about Terraform is that it is cloud vendor agnostic. That means that you have a single tool and you have to learn a single language to deal with multi-cloud environments, no matter if it is Azure, AWS, GCP, or if you're dealing with, let's say, a private cloud or private data center. So there are tons of so-called providers in Terraform that you can bring into the context of your project to mix and match or to deal with different cloud environments in order to spin up or mutate your overall cloud footprint. Obviously, Terraform itself is at its core, it's an open source project founded by HashiCorp and actively maintained by HashiCorp and obviously the community. HashiCorp offers additional paid services, like one edition is for, I think, for governance, and the other one is for collaboration, but they are not mandatory. And from our perspective, so I would say 90% of our customers are good to go with the open source, with the free version. And they deal or they bring in governance and collaboration features by services that we all use and love, like GitHub or Azure DevOps. So and we will look into those in a couple of minutes. The good thing about Terraform is that it is a full-fledged infrastructure as code lifecycle. So let me quickly go to the next slide. So in the context of Terraform, if you decide to create or mutate or manage your infrastructure with Terraform, you always loop through a life cycle. So first, you write some kind of HCL, that's HashiCorp configuration language, and I think they are right now in the phase of rebranding it to Terraform language. So maybe you find HCL or Terraform language depending on the guide that you follow to dive deeper into Terraform. Once you've written some kind of or a bit of HCL, then you obviously validate it to ensure that it's syntactically correct and that Terraform will, do what you want it to do. Actually, if that's okay, then you call something or you invoke something that's called Terraform plan. So that's a subcommand of the Terraform CLI. And what plan actually does it looks at the underlying cloud vendor. So for Azure, it's calling into Azure ARM APIs and verifying if the actual state of the infrastructure matches the state that you described in your HCL. So that plan obviously has to be verified. So if the plan is okay and it looks reasonable to you, then you can invoke something that's called Terraform apply. Again, internally, Terraform apply will present you the execution plan again, but in the end, that's the command that will talk to the Azure ARM APIs and will either provision, mutate, or destroy the infrastructure components in your Azure subscription. And once Terraform apply is finished, we can consume the infrastructure. But if you think about the scenario when you spin up, let's say, an AKS for your inner loop or for your dev team, right? And at some point you may not use it or need it anymore. Then there's Terraform destroy, which helps you, and it will actually destroy all the infrastructure components. So this, I think, the Terraform lifecycle is critical to understand. But as you will see right now, Terraform is fairly easy, and you can get started really, very quickly. So let's dive into patterns and practices. So last slide for this talk. So I've tried to figure out a good mix of patterns that may help all of you when doing Terraform in real-world projects. So we will look at state backends in Azure. We will look at infrastructure composition, custom validation as a quick one, then AKS and ACR, how to provision both with a seamless integration, because what the question I get often, and I saw a couple of posts on Stack Overflow that are kind of misleading, and yeah, I saw a bunch of customers ending up with AKS having way too much privilege or permissions on the ACR. So that's something I will show. And last but not least, a quick look at GitHub Actions and how to do a proper automation workflow in order to become fully automated. With that, let's move to, let's first have a look at VS Code. So the code that I will show today that is already on GitHub, I will share the link in the chat afterwards, so you can all download it, take it as a blueprint, or just look at it. All right, I try to keep my Terraform projects simply organized, let's say it that way. So I tend to create files by group by service. So for ACR we have dedicated, for AKS we have dedicated, and there are a bunch of files that are prefixed with an underscore to have some kind of pattern, right? So meta is always the first one that I look at, because there is that's where actually bring in the providers. So by default, Terraform is not able to talk to any kind of cloud environment. For Azure, we have the Azure RM provider that allows us to talk with Azure Resource Manager APIs. And right after that, we have some fairly basic Terraform configuration. We pinpoint the version of Terraform CLI that should be used. And then we have a backend. So as Terraform deals with multiple cloud vendors, Terraform treats something that's called the state. The state is nothing special. It's just a JSON document that holds the entire representation of your infrastructure at a certain point in time. However, state is really critical. It's mission critical for Terraform. And without further configuration, the state sits inside of your Terraform project, which means the local folder. But when you move toward, let's say, automation using, for example, GitHub Actions, or if a coworker jumps on the project, and you somehow have to deal with concurrency, because otherwise you could end up in a situation where you invoke something like Terraform Apply that modifies the underlying Azure services, and the coworker or the CI/CD pipeline could do so. And to get that up and running, you can push Terraform state to a so-called backend. And luckily, we have Azure Storage Account, so we can use Azure Storage Account as a state backend. So I have already pre-provisioned a resource group in my Azure subscription with a storage account. Inside of the storage account, we have a blob container. And for my environment, we will see a JSON file being provisioned in the storage account with the name AKS Office Hours 2021. And the interesting thing over here is I rely on all Terraform projects, from my point of view, should either use an MSI, so Managed Source Identity, or they should rely on a service principal. You can, obviously, to get started, reuse the existing authentication of Azure CLI. However, then everything happens in behalf of your user, right? So leveraging a service principal is a good practice, let's say it that way. And to do so, or to authenticate to the state backend, we can also leverage that particular service principal. And in contrast to the official documentation, please ensure if you use the service principal or the managed service identity for authenticating against the backend, the state backend, that you set the resource group name. Otherwise, Terraform isn't able to find the storage account. So that's let's keep the configuration with that. As you see, I pinned already also the Azure provider and the random provider to get a random number to get a unique name for my ACR instance later. But let's move over to the Azure portal. So there is my state backend. It's in a dedicated resource group. As I said, I have pre-provisioned that one. And what I want to show quickly is how I configured the state backend, because as I said, the state is really, really critical. So you should have a proper configuration for the storage account that's actually holding your Terraform state. So first, I have disabled all authorization using shared keys. So there's no primary key, secondary key. There are no shared access signatures. As you can see, there's also the warning over here. So we just rely on RBAC at that point in time. So if I go to access control over here, you can see I've let me go to role assignments. We have a service principal for AKS office hours that I've created previously. It's contributor on the subscription, because Terraform will provision services like AKS in behalf of that service principal. That's why it's contributor on the subscription. And yeah, this one, let's talk about that one later. Let me dive into containers. There's my Terraform state container, and I've explicitly configured a role assignment for that one over here. So the service principal has a storage blob data owner. So that's the only one who is able to, besides the inherited one, right? That's the only one who is able to modify the state files. I gave myself reader permissions on that container, so I can use the built-in, let's go one step back, Storage Explorer, and can dive through the blob containers, and I can at least see, okay, there is my Terraform state file over there, and perhaps there is a lock, because Terraform used the lock mechanism offered by storage account to prevent concurrent modifications. On top of that, I've tried to trim down the storage account as much as possible. So I've disabled files, I've disabled tables, queues, I have, where is it? Data protection. I have enabled soft delete. I have enabled versioning for blobs. Obviously, you should also enable continuously or on an interval and backup for the storage account, so that your state files are backed regularly. And last but not least, I've set a management lock on that storage account, so that no one can actually, with one step, delete that entire storage account. With all that in mind, you should have a proper configuration for your Terraform state backend, and you can, leverage different Terraform workspaces. That's if you haven't heard of workspaces, that's a concept how you can apply a Terraform project for multiple, let's say, environments. For example, dev, QA and prod, or dev state prod. Then each one is a dedicated workspace, and a workspace just ends up in being a dedicated JSON file in your state backend. But with that configuration, you're good to go. Okay, so let's quickly go to this one. What do we have over there? Infrastructure compensation. So for AKS is typically a service that you have once in your infrastructure, right? If you have multiple teams have multiple AKS or Kubernetes clusters, or you have one or multiple per environment. But typically that's a service where that's very centric, right? At least for the projects I faced in the recent past. But there are services where you may want to have, or that you may want to reuse. And Terraform has the concept of so-called modules that allow you to build reusable infrastructure components, right? And if you, I don't know if some of you have strong history in .NET. So one of the facts why .NET was so successful was the possibility to create composable components, right, to build Windows forms back in those days. And Terraform has like similar concept, right? So we can, for example, take our Azure Container Registry and move that into an dedicated Terraform module, and then we can bring in some validation and to ensure some kind of governance. So for example, my project right now allows to set that I can set any SKU on that ACR. However, perhaps I just want to allow standard or premium SKU. Obviously, you can use Azure policies or Azure secure, or you can create an Azure blueprint to achieve that. But at this point in the overall journey, you're early in the life cycle, right? So the Terraform could be the first line of defense to ensure some kind of governance. And to transform our ACR into a kind of module that we can reuse in different projects, we can start by just pushing it into a dedicated folder. So let's say we have components, ACR main.tf, and let's take the contents of that one and push it over here. So because Terraform just takes files in the current folder into consideration, so it's not, you know, going recursively down the folder structure. So if I invoke Terraform on my root folder over here, it won't provision any kind of ACR right now because ACR is in a subfolder. And modules have like, you can think of it as like a microcontroller, right? So you have inputs and outputs that are variables so the inputs are variables in Terraform and outputs are called outputs. So we can just go to variables and let me quickly check that one. So we need a location, we need resource group name, SKU, and admin enabled. So let's go to variables, location. Let's grab that one. Let's put that one just over here quickly. And let's say SKU, we want it to be premium. If so, then premium. If not, then we stick with standard. And admin enabled is bad practice, so let's set that to false. And the tags, let's pass them also in. So let's quickly create the variables that we need. So we need a variable called premium, which is of type equals bool, right? We can provide a default value of false, for example. We need another, quickly copy that instead of messing the time of typing. Okay, we need the name for the resource group, our RG name. So that's a string. And we don't pass a default value. So if at invocation time, if you don't provide a variable, Terraform CLI will ask you for it. So for now, let's leave it blank. Over there, then we have the location. That is, we already invoked that one. We need a random integer. Let's get rid of those. Let's just provide a sticky name AKS office hours 2021. Hopefully that one is free. And the tags, let's add a variable called tags. We have another one over here. Tags, that's a map. And the default is just an empty map. Okay, so that would be the interface for our ACR. However, my surrounding project, I want to, create a seamless integrated environment where AKS is immediately able to pull down images from ACR. So with Azure Portal, that's just a click, right? In Azure CLI, we can just say -- attach -ACR and provide the ID of the ACR. Under the hood, a bunch of things happen. And what happened is that a role assignment is configured for the identity that's used to run the AKS, so that that identity is able to pull images from ACR. And if we take a look at the AKS resource over here, so as you can see, there are a bunch of variables so that you can configure if you want a full elastic, let's say that way, AKS, where auto scaling is configured depending on your needs. And there is an identity. And the identity is I set it to a user assigned identity, so I can have the identity, which is also part of the infrastructure right here in code, right? So if you take a look at identity, that's just a user assigned identity. I gave it the name AKS and the display name of identity -AKS and the Terraform workspace that we use. And at some point, we create a role assignment for that identity. And in contrast to many guides and many, let's say blog posts or conversations that you find online, ACR pull is enough. There are tons of guides that say you need a highly privileged identity on the ACR. That's wrong. But you just need ACR pull if you don't want to, run your CI/CD pipelines or system inside of AKS. So let's take a look at that one. So we have a name, we have the principality that points to the identity, and we have the scope, and the scope is set to the identifier of the Azure Container Registry, right? So somehow we have to get that one, because the module by default does nothing, right? We have to reference the module later on, and the module needs some kind of output. So we can just say we have an output over here, and we call that ACR ID, ID, and we say the value comes from Azure RM Container Registry, ACR, and that's the ID. You don't have to memorize all of those. I've installed an extension over here. Let me quickly look in the dev container. StaffH Terraform documentation links. That one is really, really worth installing it if you do Terraform, because it allows you to just command or control click on the type, and you immediately get a deep link into the documentation. And here you can see, okay, what can I set on an ACR, or more interesting on an AKS, because AKS has way more configuration properties, right? And we see the so-called attribute reference. And attributes is everything that is exported when Terraform finishes provisioning that service. And as you can see, there's the ID. Okay, so the ID is right now an output of our module. How can we use that? So let's go to our actual project, and let's reuse my ACR, our module. The source is the actual folder components -ACR -main. That's okay. So, and we can just provide the variables. So let's quickly take premium and set that explicitly to false, although it's the default value. We can provide a name that's Azure RM resource group RG name. We can provide the tags equal local.tags. We can provide location, so just mapping it to the variables that we already have. Location equals var.location. And I think we are good to go with this one. Yeah, just need to grab the output. So we have referenced the module, right? We can reference modules from local folders, from UNC paths, from Git repositories. So you can provide a Git tag to pin to a certain version. So modules are really, really great when it comes to more complex infrastructure projects. So I've given a key or name to the module. That's my ACR. And I have to go to the role assignment, and I have to say module, module, my ACR, and provide the name of the output so that I get access to that one. All right, so if I bring in a new module, I have to execute Terraform get once, because Terraform get looks through your project, it identifies all the modules that you use, and it tries to load them into the current context, right? So it checks if the path, if the source that I provided over here is valid. In our case, we get a 0 exit code, and it confirms, okay, my ACR comes from components/ACR. So Terraform offers more. It offers Terraform form FMT to format everything. Okay, that's good. Terraform validate to validate my entire project. Oop, and there's an error. Very premium has not been declared. Did you mean premium? Okay, let me quickly double check. Premium and premium.
It's a typo.
It said Permium.
Ah, premium. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, premium. That's that way. Okay, so let's. Great. So that one is valid. So, yeah, modules are a way to introduce some kind of governance, because no matter how the user of your Terraform module may want to configure his container registry, you don't allow anyone to create an ACR instance with an admin account. And the same applies for AKS, right? So for AKS, I always, all of our customers right now use the SLA that they can, I don't know, pay around about 75 euros per month per cluster to get an SLA on the AKS service offering. So it would be a good idea to set that one to paid, so no one can provision a free cluster, no matter if it is, especially if it is in production cluster. All right, maybe you saw it quickly while I was copying things around. One thing that was mentioned on the slides was variable validation, and over here I did that. So I just want to have infrastructure components either in East-US2, Germany Central, which is Frankfurt, Germany West Central, or West Europe. Otherwise, the deployment should fail. This one is especially important if you use AKS add-on to bring in, log analytics integration with container insights, because otherwise you may end up with an infrastructure configuration where AKS runs in, let's say, East-US, and your log analytics workspace runs in West-US, and then you have to pay for the traffic that goes between two Azure regions, right? So that's a good practice to bring in, not only variables, also bring in some kind of validation. At a certain point, you don't have to, validate every single property, because Terraform will fail if you provide an invalid value. So if I specify a location, let's say, I don't know, Hamburg, and there's no Azure region in Hamburg, then it will obviously fail. Yeah, it allows you to harden your infrastructure as code project a little bit more. All right, let's quickly double check with this one. So AKS ACR, there's one additional point. So I have that that service principle, right? That I use to execute to provision the infrastructure. And resource groups. Oh no, let me go to subscriptions quickly. And role assignments. I think I have created it over here. Let me quickly check where it is. Role assignment manager, yeah, that's a custom role. So in order to get that up and running, right, to allow my service principal to create a role assignment, I can either promote the service principal to be an owner in the subscription, which is way too much from my point of view. So it's a good practice to create a dedicated role assignment. And let's take a look at that one. So it can create role assignments, delete role assignments, and it can even, tie it also to a resource group. If you provision your infrastructure to an existing resource group, like, for example, it's the default mode for, I think, ARM templates and Project Bicep. But for me, with Terraform, I want to provision also the resource group, right? So I've created that custom role over here, the role assignment manager, and where's identity and access management over there, role assignment. I've assigned that one to my service principal, because otherwise the deployment will fail and present you a message that the service principal is not allowed, to create a role assignment. And that's in 90% of the cases when people ask, why can't I provision AKS with ACR through Terraform? That's the root cause often, that the service principal has not the permission to create that role assignment. And those things occur just with the point, or just at that point in time when you push your code to GitHub and the project gets invoked in the context of the service principal. If you previously relied on your AZ, your Azure CLI authentication, then you may not see the error locally, but you will see it in your GitHub action. Which brings us to GitHub Actions. Okay, so one thing I may not forget. So I have the CI file over here. Let me add a reminder. That's good. Okay, so it's a very fairly easy one, right? So we have just one job. It runs on Ubuntu. My repository have a bunch of secrets, right? Like the service principal client ID, client secret, the desired Azure subscription ID, the desired Azure tenant ID. And because I want to enable SSH access to the Linux nodes in my AKS, I have provided the SSH public key as a secret on that repo. Okay, first, obviously, I check out the code, then I set up the desired Terraform version. Then I ensure that all source code is formatted correctly. I can also invoke Terraform validate over here. And that's also possible, but for now, that's good. Then I do Terraform init. Terraform init looks at the entire project, and in meta, it sees provider random, provider Azure, RM, and it downloads them into the context of the project, right? Last but not least, before executing the plan, because I introduced ACR as a module, I have to run Terraform get. So that's just a display name. Let's give it an ID. It's called get, and say run Terraform get, because I did that locally and I have to ensure that it's also being executed on during CI run. Okay, then I execute Terraform plan, which gives us like in Git status just for infrastructure, right? It shows us, okay, if you execute it right now, this will happen. And we execute it only if it is a pull request. But we continue on the error. We just continue to command the pull request with the actual output. So just using some markdown in combination with GitHub script. to create a comment on the actual pull request. And then we revisit the plan status and check if that one was a failure, then we exit the CI run. However, if it is a push on the main branch, then we actually modify the infrastructure. And that's what we are going to test right now. So as you can see, I did a bunch of...
Also wanted to call out, we are coming up to only 4 minutes left. So just wanted to give you that quick reminder.
Okay,
make sure that we wrap. Yeah, no worries. Also, if this is out there, like any of this demo content, I'm sure people would be interested. If you have a link, feel free to send that over to me.
Definitely, yeah. And so we just have to push it to origin/feature-demo. And then we should immediately get the link to the pull request, right? So bear with me, not providing any description for my PR. And now it's just up to GitHub to give us a container quickly. Yeah, there we go. Come on, spin it up. Okay, so it's checking out the source code. It's ensuring it's formatted correctly. It's downloading the module. It's executing Terraform plan. And while it is looking at my Azure infrastructure, we can go back to conversation and see that the formatting is correct, initialization worked, the plan succeeded. And it tells me, okay, I will scroll down, add 6 infrastructure things and destroy 1. Okay, that's good. Rebase and merge. Confirm rebase and merge. There we go. And now the same action gets invoked again, but right now it won't plan the changes. It will actually call to or interact with Azure ARM API and spin up AKS, ACR, and all the other services described as part of the Terraform project. So we should see that in a second. It's trying to find existing infrastructure. It doesn't find things. So come on. Creating, and it starts creating things. And with that, we can, continue looking at the GitHub action output while it provisions ACR and AKS.
I'm going to give you an opportunity also, Thorsten, if you don't mind. I dropped a link to a Microsoft form in the chat. If you're interested in getting the post-call links and any updates around topics or cancellations via email, I've dropped that there. So please just fill that out if you're interested. It's opt-in only. So if you're not interested, you don't need to fill out anything. Just wanted to call that out if you're interested.
Cool. And I will quickly publish the link to the repo. There we go. The right one. Yeah, and with that, I will say that's it from my point.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for this. I know that we were coming right up on time, but this was great. I think everybody took a lot away from it, and maybe there will be an opportunity to do like a follow-up session where we dive a little bit more into some of these concepts. I know there was a question really quick for those who want to stick around. What are the recommended practices? Should we create one workflow or multiple workflows for ACR, AKS policies, etc.? I don't know if you want to speak to that. I definitely have my thoughts on it, but I think it would be good to get your perspective.
Yeah, so it depends. We always try to take a look at what's the context. If your project needs a dedicated ACR, then I would create everything in a single project. If the ACR is perhaps managed by a dedicated team or has a broader scope, then it's a different infrastructure project from my point of view.
Awesome, thanks. Appreciate that. And then there was a question around Atlantis, still the go-to project for GitOps using Terraform. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Atlantis?
Yeah, I'm personally not familiar, but maybe somebody else.
I don't know. Haven't heard of that. Sorry.
Yeah, I haven't either. So maybe that's a good good follow up that we can get back on. But I've never personally worked with that before. Okay, awesome. Thanks everyone. We really appreciate it. Once again, I'm going to drop that link in the chat window to keep it at the bottom if you're interested in getting that communication. But if not, we'll upload all of this to the GitHub repo.
Cool.